Hello my quilting friends, Leah Day here with a special story video. I got into beadwork back in the day. It was in 6th grade when a friend of mine introduced me to stitching beads together with thread on a loom. And this was one of my very early pieces. It's a little landscape stitched entirely with seed beads, and I did like this volcano on one side and this kind of ocean landscape on the other side. So this is what I was making in middle school. It just lets you know where I've come from. And this is why I can hand stitch such tiny, tiny stitches, because I think in terms of seed beads. That was the size of the stitch that I was really used to creating. But here's the thing. Getting into this, when I got into it, I had a very narrow definition of what beadwork was, what counted. And that was beads and thread. Nothing else could be involved. I could not stitch beads on fabric. That was cheating, you know? And so what started out as a really fun craft really quickly devolved into something very boring. And I kind of kept making the same thing over and over again. I started making bigger and bigger pieces, and they took forever, and it wasn't sustainable. You know, as I got older, I went to college. I didn't have time and I didn't have space for a big bead loom. And I started getting really frustrated and really bored because all I could do was stitch beads together with thread. I did not have a wide enough definition to be able to do a wide variety of things. This is why when I got into quilting, I was really adamant about never narrowing down the definition of what made a quilt a quilt. So a quilt can be a single layer of fabric. It can also be pieced in traditional or modern blocks. It can also be, 17 layers of batting and fabric all layered together and stitched. There's no single definition of what makes a quilt a quilt. As far as the different styles we've got, modern and traditional and art, and all of it counts, and all of it is an option to try. It's very hard to keep your world this open because there's so many possibilities and there's so much fun stuff to play with. But I would rather have the whole world of possibilities than a tiny narrow box where I get bored and frustrated. So if you've been catching yourself making rules and what counts in quilting, be very careful, and I challenge you to challenge those thoughts. Because one of these days, you're going to want to pull out those paints and you're going to want to try weird and different techniques. And you have to have that open to you, because otherwise your craft will suffer. So I hope that you take this and learn from it. I certainly wish that I had heard it way back in the day. Probably would still be doing a lot more beadwork if I had. Until next time, let's go quilt.